All right. Hey, Kate, how you doing?
Hey, Alana. I'm doing really well. How about you?
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. So, just for quick intros, people watching this probably know me. My name's Alana Miller, integrative psychiatrist, private practice owner. I have a mentorship program that teaches other psychiatrists like you how to build integrative private practices. Maybe give people a one-line introduction on who you are.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Kate Salama. I'm a reproductive psychiatrist, and I have a private practice in Denver, but I also do telehealth to New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts.
So tell me a little bit about where you were at when we first connected. So I remember you joined my program, I think it was January 2022. How did you even come across my stuff? Like what even led you to reach out in the first place?
Yeah, so I had opened up my practice in September 2021, and I had been working in academics for 2 or 3 years before that. So I did a women's mental health fellowship, and then I took my first attending job in an academic women's mental health division. That was in Boston. And then my family and I had moved to Colorado to kind of move towards the sunshine and kind of have better lifestyle. So I had to leave my academic job, and I kind of knew I wanted to ultimately start a private practice eventually and like not stay in academics forever. So this was kind of that breaking point with my academic job. So I opened my practice, and I really wanted to have a full-time reproductive psychiatry practice. And I just remember in the beginning, things were slow and I wasn't getting that many patients. So I was like, I think I just need more training. I don't think I'm ready yet to open the practice. People aren't coming. Like maybe I need another fellowship.
Yeah.
So I remember looking up integrative psychiatry fellowships at that point. I was like, yeah, maybe if I just have an additional certification, that's when people will kind of see value in my practice. And so I remember doing a lot of Googling and was like looking at Andrew Weil's program amongst other programs, and then kind of stumbled upon your content. And I started watching a lot of your YouTube videos. I remember just like was fascinated. I consumed your content, probably all within a few days.
Oh, thanks.
Your blogs and watching your YouTube. And I was like, oh my God, maybe I don't have to do another fellowship. Maybe I can get help with building my practice. But also I did have this real desire to learn integrative psychiatry, which had never been part of my training. And I was like, wow, I can't believe this is landing in my lap. Like maybe I can learn integrative psychiatry without undergoing like 2 years of very formal education where I'd have to like halt my practice. This is something I can learn and integrate into my practice immediately. And so I remember I reached out and did a call with you. And then I think I was very quickly in after that.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny what you're saying about you were Googling, because I don't think I remember that part that you were Googling like integrative psychiatry fellowship. So many people say that where when the business isn't picking up, or even before they get to the part of starting a private practice, they have the assumption of, I just need more degrees and certifications, which I think is funny because you already are like an MD who had residency training, had fellowship training, worked in academics, and had that fear of like, oh, that's the limiting factor. So a lot of people end up coming to you for those reasons. So anyway, so you ended up joining. Then tell me kind of what your overall experience was like in the beginning and what it was like over time.
Yeah, I loved the program in the beginning. I remember like at that time I had time. I wasn't super busy in my practice. So like I was spending some time doing my practice work, but I was like, I rapidly consumed your modules and I loved it. Like I remember every night I was in bed watching, watching videos, and I was like, oh my God, this is just like the encouragement and motivation I need to stay in this, because I think at that point I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out for private practice.
Oh, really?
I think it was like kind of an emotional roller coaster for me in the beginning, because I just went right in. I didn't have a part-time job or anything to kind of like fall back on. And I was like, oh my God, like what if this doesn't work out? I remember like I had even through that fall been like, maybe I do just need to get a regular job, something steady, something stable, like something where I don't have to be wondering if the phone is going to ring. Your program was so vital for me in the beginning, just so I could like take on your confidence and like optimism.
That's funny. Yeah.
And just like kind of believe that I could do it and I could stick with it. And I had some support to keep going. And I think it was so helpful in the beginning just to hear from people who had been in the program a little bit longer and to hear that like I was having a normal experience.
It's so funny you say that, because my next question was going to be like, I mean, you already had a practice. You really already had the foundation in place.
Yeah.
So what fundamentally changed once we started working together? And it's interesting to hear, if I'm hearing correctly, it was more of the mental aspect of of like the confidence piece. And I tell this to people all the time when, I'm do calls with people like, oh, if people don't succeed, like, why is it? I'm like, honestly, internal obstacles. There's just no way around that. As much as we all fear that, the market's saturated, there's so much competition, people won't pay us, they could just go to someone else who charges less or takes insurance or whatever it is. The supply is here and the demand is here. And so it's really just a matter of not giving up prematurely. Like maybe you were already doing marketing before, but you just did more, or was it that you were like more persistent, or did you do anything differently? Like what changed with kind of like your approach to getting patients?
Yeah, I do think mindset just helps so much. And like, even I think just feeling more confident, like that came across when I was networking or when I was doing my consultation calls. Like I remember in the beginning, like just even being nervous to pick up the phone for a consultation call, like I have to have this like kind of script down, like I was very anxious about it. And then I think just the confidence and like, like you also kind of gave us some scripts to practice with, and just knowing that like, like these are kind of like the right things to say, or these are the things you might anticipate that someone might come up with in terms of like hesitancies, and this is how you respond. And just kind of like knowing that there was a way forward on those phone calls, I think helped a lot. I think I also, I had initially not posted my fees on my website, and then through your program decided to post my fees on my website. And I think that was actually really helpful for me. I remember at the beginning, like I was just, my fees, I don't think they were that high, but I was getting a lot when they weren't on my website. So I was getting a lot of calls where I had to reveal the fee, and then just getting a lot of pushback. Oh, that's so expensive. And I think that was really demoralizing.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Bad psychiatrist, like, should I not be charging these fees? And just feeling really, really down. So I think also just like adjusting my consultation call process such that people knew a few things about my practice before they scheduled a call with me. And then I was much more confident on those calls, and I knew how to sell myself better. I knew how to explain my value better.
Yeah.
With your program and doing some of the worksheets and just kind of like exploratory work.
Yeah, it's interesting because if I'm hearing correctly, you didn't necessarily do anything so different. It was more doing the things you were already doing with more strategy, like with like a specific plan to it. Because one of the things I take pride on is that, everyone knows network with people, but I try to get really specific of like, how do you think tactically about whom you network with, and how exactly do you phrase the message? I have those templates of how you should phrase the email and explanation of why you do each sentence in the email. And sometimes those little tweaks, when 100 people are trying to do the same thing, if you're in the top 5% of doing it tactically and putting in just that little extra effort, it's those people who put in that extra little effort and do things smarter who get the rewards, as opposed to kind of just putting in a bunch of effort but not being as strategic about the way it's done.
Yeah, totally. And I think like, I think learning the foundations of integrative psychiatry was also like really important for my practice. And that's what I kind of got from the beginnings of like work of being in your program. I think I didn't really know any integrative psychiatry before your program. And I think having the modules, but then also easy to use protocols, that like I really did feel like I could use them with my patients right away and just start practicing with integrative psychiatry, and then marketing that as well. And I think the idea that like I remember the just-in-time framework, that was really kind of important for me to kind of internalize. I definitely am like a just-in-case person. And so I think I started to feel more comfortable taking on cases that were like just outside my comfort zone, being like, I can, study and read and learn about this in the few days before an intake, especially in the beginning of my practice when I had more time. And that I think was confidence building as well, to know that like I could treat someone well and learn what I needed to take good care of them. And I didn't have to have this like extensive background in whatever they're presenting with.
Yeah, and for people watching this, like the just in time versus just in case concept is, I think most doctors, most clinicians, were really conscientious. We operate by default with just in case, meaning I need to learn all of this just in case maybe in the future I need it, versus just in time is I've got a patient scheduled with this next week. let's learn it now. And I actually think when you learn that way, not only does it remove a bunch of stress of not feeling you have to do everything in advance, but you actually retain the information a lot better because you are immediately applying it with a patient, immediately seeing what works, what doesn't work, and kind of that feeds back, as opposed to just like a fire hose of information that you don't necessarily know how to apply. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what your experience was with the integrative psychiatry piece and kind of how that worked for you with applying it with patients and learning it in my program. Because the way I kind of tell people about it is my program doesn't cover integrative psychiatry as comprehensively as, say, if you did a fellowship. But what I try to do is, instead of being really broad, like I've had people tell me, oh, I did IPI and I know so many things, but if a patient's in front of me, I don't actually know what to do with that individual patient. I try to teach the most important things that are really concrete and really practical, where you know 80% of what you need to know to treat the patients that are in front of you. And then the rest you can kind of supplement. And it doesn't need to be a fellowship. It can be reading a journal article or reading a chapter in a book or something like that. So what was like your process? Would you study the protocol before you saw a patient? How would you kind of combine the patient care with the studying piece of it?
Yeah, I think at first I probably just kind of consumed all of the modules consecutively, and then I would definitely like go back kind of before an intake and relook at modules. And honestly, I still do that, and I still kind of look at your protocols before I see patients fairly often. And I think it just gave me, like you're saying, like this very, very clinically applicable information. And I've heard the same about other fellowships, that maybe they're much more in depth, but you kind of come away like not knowing how to apply the information. And I did like the Institute for Functional Medicine's hormone module, and it was very in depth, and I don't think it was as clinically useful as the information that you have in your modules. So I think like the way you just were able to present it and break it down, like you can kind of come in as a beginner and understand it and use it right away. I think that was so helpful. And like since then, I've built upon that much more in terms of like doing other trainings or, reading lots of books, consuming podcasts that are more in the like integrative functional space. But I think like your information was like the best foundation. And I literally like could read it and use it with a patient the next day.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm not like against fellowships or anything. I think just the best time to do it is maybe a year or 2 or even 3 into your practice, when you have more clinical experience. So you have a context for the fire hose. So that makes sense. Like I love IFM, but I didn't do the hormone module. I did the general kind of global overview one. And I was like, I'm glad I did this now, a few years into my practice, because if I'd done this in the beginning, it would have made 0 sense to me. I would have not it's so detailed, which is great, but then also can get overwhelming if there's just no context and you're not able to use it with patients in the moment. So that's what I appreciate you saying that. I try to have my stuff be foundational and practical. It's almost more of like an apprenticeship than a fellowship. Like the fellowships that exist are more like the first 2 years of medical school. You're listening to lectures, you're kind of studying, rather than like clerkships where you're getting practical stuff and then seeing patients and then discussing it, because the other I do is, we have these every other week calls where then people can bring specific cases and we can talk through cases. And it's cool too, because I can share details about my thoughts on a case, but then now there's all these people with experiences beyond what mine is. Like you, I would say, I don't, much more about the hormonal stuff than I do, especially with like women's sex steroid hormones. And so to have other people who can, whether it's in calls or in the forum, contribute to knowledge. And I think it's the community is such that everyone's very helpful, like and supportive with each other.
Yeah. And I think like that was the other key with kind of learning the integrative psychiatry content, that like, if you had a question or a case, like you could immediately kind of present it and get feedback or feel like, okay, I can try this. And I know that I have mentorship around like using these new strategies and just peer support, which I think just also helps so much kind of in the confidence in, actually like trying kind of new skills that you kind of have that support behind you. I mean, it's amazing because so many people are coming from tons of different backgrounds, have had so many different experiences in mental health, different specialties. So I think it is really cool just to get feedback from like this multidisciplinary group that all has their, kind of own expertise.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is what your experience was like with the community. Because some people participate in the community more than others. Like it's to each his own. Some people, I notice when they come in, they're more like the self-study types, kind of doing things on their own. I like rarely hear from them. And then, 8 months later, oh yeah, things are great. My practice is full or whatever. Like, okay, I guess you were just doing that on your own that whole time. But then I also know other people like have formed real friendships and stuff. What's it been like for you? To what degree are you connected with other people through the program?
Yeah, I feel like your community has attracted just a really like warm, supportive group of people. Cool. I think like I've definitely been in other groups where like the community aspect like doesn't feel quite as like robust or cohesive or supportive. So I think it's been impressive, especially like, I don't know, in the real world, there can be some tension between like psychiatry, nurse practitioner. Like, I think like it is nice to be in a group where like feels like everyone's on like an even playing field and really supportive of each other's practices and businesses. Yeah. And I've definitely like, especially, lately just like have been talking to some people in the program individually. I've shared referrals with a bunch of people in the program, which is really nice. I mean, I think, like there's some people's practices you just really relate to and kind of connect with, and it's really cool. Like when I have a patient, who's moving to another state and they're like, who's like kind of like you, I see someone like you. And I'm like, I know exactly who to send you to. And that always feels really good. So I think the community aspect has been huge. And especially because people are at so many different stages of their practice, I think there's like, a group of us now who have been in a little bit longer and we're maybe taking steps in our practice, and there's like support around that in a community, which is just amazing, because all of this can be very isolating.
Yeah. And actually, that's a really good point, that I know a fear sometimes people have going to private practice is like, is it isolating? Will I feel isolated? Because certainly, I mean, you worked in academics. It's not the same as walking into a hospital or walking into a clinic and you see 15 other attendings, you're working with residents or whatever it is. It's not the same as working at a Kaiser and you're getting, I don't know, lunch with your friends at the cafeteria or something like that. Although I don't know, I think Kaiser maybe everyone's virtual now anyway, so I'm not sure. But I do think when you're in private practice, it becomes more important. You have to go out of your way to have a community, but these communities exist. It doesn't have to be just like you're in your silo by yourself, doing it all by yourself. There's groups of people who are also doing private practice. We like to congregate together. So, it doesn't have to be solitary.
Yeah. And I think like I haven't, that part of private practice, like I think because I joined your program pretty early on, like I have not felt like that kind of isolation in any significant way. And I mean, I've definitely kind of sought out people locally as well who I kind of connect with regularly, which helps too. But I think having, being like, you can open a web page and like have access to like 100+ like-minded peers and kind of bounce things off of them, I think is really comforting.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about what your practice is like. Because one of the things I like to highlight is, the different styles of practice a person can have, like the schedules. You focus on women's mental health, reproductive psychiatry, hormonal balance in women. Talk about like, what's your schedule like? Like how many patients do you see a week? How many hours do you work a week? How does that look?
I've like kind of done a few different things. Like I've tried to kind of actually limit my patient care to 3 days a week, to kind of admin days or days that I can do other things. I would say on busier weeks, like my patients definitely do bleed into those admin days. Like sometimes feels hard to keep them protected. But that's like kind of my ultimate goal. And I would say I see about like 20 patient hours a week.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like a really nice balance coming from like a 40, like 40 patient facing hour a week job. And I do mostly medication management. So most of my visits are 30 minutes, but I do have some therapy cases, which are 50 or 60 minutes. So I usually have like 2 therapy cases a week, I would say. And then the rest are my 30-minute visits.
Okay, primarily like shorter, more, I won't say med management, because I know you do things besides med management that time, but more focused on the biological, physiological piece. And maybe the person has, either they don't need therapy or has like a separate therapist if they need one.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I'm usually kind of like starting my day around 9 because I have little kids and kind of like do the morning with them and get them off to daycare. And then, similarly kind of wrap up at 5 to be able to pick them up and then don't see any patients on weekends.
Yeah. And that's another nice thing too about private practice is you can create your own schedule. Like for you, you're like, I like doing it all in 3 days. I can do admin or other things in other time, or I got to be with my kids in the morning. So you can clear out that time. So it allows everyone to just based on like what works for an individual's schedule. Like you can pretty much make it work within reason, like there's a lot of like new moms that will join my program. They're like, I just had to leave. I don't want to go back to my work after maternity leave. Like I want to have my own practice.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing for young parents, I think, to have a private practice. I mean, on one hand, I think like what's tricky is if like the kids get sick and then it's like, oh, that's like my whole day of income or lots of patients. But I think otherwise, I mean, it's just so flexible. And yeah, like if my kids have something that I want to go to in the middle of the day, like I just plan around that and it's no big deal. And so I love that. And I think I, similarly to you, have a psychiatrist father and I like remember like how his work-life balance was amazing. And that was something he loved and I think was great because he was around a lot and at the important things as a kid. And I remember that. So.
That's amazing. And that's funny. I didn't know he was your dad was a psychiatrist too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what about income? And you don't need to say any specific numbers, but just like generally with those 20 patient hours, how does that just generally compare to when you were working full time? Does it match it? Is it a little bit more? Is it a little bit less?
Yeah, I've now exceeded what I was making in academics full time, which was great. Looking back, and when I joined your program, I was making like 11,000 a month, and now this is actually the first month I'll be over 30,000.
That's amazing. 20 hours a week, not bad.
Yeah. So that's very cool, And I feel like I put a lot into my practice and like really, like do a lot of work even outside those like clinical hours with my patients, but it still feels like a very like great kind of return on investment.
Yeah. And this will be the last question I ask before we transition is, people watching this, hearing like, okay, this all like sounds great. For the most part, there's no one that's like, I wouldn't join your program if it were free. You know what I mean? Like no one's like, this sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah.
It's usually kind of like, oh, it seems expensive. What would you say to someone who's kind of like, well, this all sounds really good. I know I want private practice. All these benefits sound great. I'm just not sure about the cost part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that you so quickly kind of make the money back that it's kind of a no-brainer if you're wanting both business and marketing support and you want to build a foundation in integrative psychiatry. I mean, I honestly think that like I might have given up on my practice.
Really?
Been in like a dead-end job if not for joining your program. Like, hard to say for sure, but I think I was really wavering and just like not sure if I kind of had the stamina to push through. So I think for me, I mean, just like whatever the investment was, it was so worth it because I really like, I love my practice. I feel like I kind of do have like a dream career and I'm doing exactly what I want and seeing exactly what I want to see. So it's like whatever, that's worth so much as this is like, my career for many, many years to come.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. That's how I feel too, is where the idea is you build this foundation, right? And then you have this career for decades. Like certainly someone could try to learn what I teach for less, but I really sincerely try to create the best thing that exists on this topic, like the best program. I'm always really trying to improve it. I sent out, the survey last month, trying to get feedback so we can even build more things this year. So sincerely, it's like for someone who's really dedicated and wants to do this, like my goal is that I make it almost impossible not to succeed. Like that's like my sincere intent is to remove those like internal and external obstacles that get people to give up or to even maybe not do it in the first place.
Yeah. And I feel like what's been so cool is it feels like the program kind of grows with you. I feel like you're in some programs and you're like, okay, I get a lot of value in the beginning and then it kind of loses value over time. But I think anything that kind of comes up for me that I'm like, like, should I hire a virtual assistant? And how would I think about doing that? Or like, should I run Google ads at this point in my practice? It's like, oh, Alana has covered that. And I can just kind of go to her modules because you've built this like history of trust, I think with everyone in the program. And it's great to just have like one source of information that you can trust in and rely on as you're advancing in your practice.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And actually, this I think leads perfectly to our next question, because I've seen it now so many times, these inevitable stages people go through in building a practice. In the beginning, it's kind of the fear and anxiety, but then eventually people are cruising. And then everyone fills. Again, there's so much demand. If you have like a decent practice and decent clinical skills and you do the work of like making yourself visible, you'll fill. And often some people just want to stay on cruise control at that point. My dad was like that, he just, once he filled his practice, he's like cruise control for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, totally.
But for some people, we get maybe whether it's like the entrepreneurial bug or just we want to keep growing, both in terms of the business side, but the clinical skill side. So maybe I know your practice is full. Talk a little bit about what you're working on now.
Yeah. So I'm really excited. Like I feel like I don't know if I would have done this without your program. I feel like much more of an entrepreneur than when I started. So I've built a program on holistic women's health and hormone balancing. And the idea kind of came out of I had this very academic, conventional reproductive psychiatry training. I think I kind of got the best training in reproductive psychiatry that one could. And I feel incredibly comfortable with my reproductive psychiatry skills. And so I thought no problem. I know everything there is to know in that space in terms of kind of treating patients in my practice. And what I realized is that there was so much I didn't know once I was kind of treating real world patients, and so things well, how do I safely get off birth control and kind of optimize physical and mental health for pregnancies? I had never learned that. I have so many people who come to me and I just feel like my hormones are off. What do you think about hormone testing? What kinds of tests would I do? What do they show? Where's the value? How do you interpret, saliva or blood or urine? I never learned any of that. And so over the past few years, I've really cobbled together this education for myself in kind of women's health and hormone balancing that is much more in the holistic functional space. And it's helped me treat my patients so much more successfully. And so this course is trying to bring together conventional and more integrative or functional women's health, strategies and kind of hormone balancing interventions.
I think it's so cool what you're doing. And just even go back full circle to how we started, which is that you didn't do a fellowship, but you gained an expertise in this through actual clinical experience, and now you're so skilled at it, and you're really skilled, way more than I do in this area. I'm sure other areas too, but definitely in this area. And now kind of being able to teach others how to do this. And it just shows how being able to practice clinically is a really excellent way to learn on the fly, and that you can gain serious domain expertise through learning as you're going clinically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's so, there's so many patients, they want some of the conventional medicine, but I think they also realize, kind of we do, that it's not enough in a lot of cases, and it doesn't get someone to kind of complete healing or wellness. And you have to kind of weave in nutritional strategies and supplementation strategies, and perhaps go deeper with functional lab testing. And it's really hard to find a provider in the women's health space that can kind of bring together those two worlds.
Tell me a little bit about the program specifically. How is it structured? How do people do the learning within it?
Yeah, so I modeled it very similarly to yours, because I think yours has been so successful. So I have 12 pre-recorded modules when you come into the program. I'm going to be doing bi-weekly live Zoom calls that will also be recorded. There'll be a community forum, and hopefully as the program goes, a referral network within the program as well.
Yeah, so some self-study aspects, but then also if people have questions about specific cases and applying things, interpreting testing results for a patient, implementing nutraceuticals with a patient, then they can come onto a call and ask you about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what will someone who does this come out of it be like? What kind of skills, clinical skills, will they come out of it being able to do?
I think that someone could really like feel much more confident in working with women's mental health, as well as anything where women are struggling with their hormones. And so I do everything from like just understanding how to identify if a woman has a hormonal imbalance to begin with. And like, if we think someone has low progesterone, like how does that present? How do you test for it? I help women like really learn more about their menstrual cycles and talk about different types of birth control in connection with mental health, as well as like fertility awareness methods and kind of how to use fertility awareness methods to prevent pregnancy as well as to achieve pregnancy. So everything from that to I like go into low libido and, how to improve sexual health and low libido in women through hormonal balance, whether that's bioidentical hormones or supplementation or nutrition. So again, like everything that I've found that I've needed to know in my practice to most fully treat my patients that I felt like is missing from a conventional medicine or reproductive psychiatry training. And I do think it's applicable to, psychiatrists and nurse practitioners, but also practitioners who don't prescribe, as it's not very pharmacologic based. There's so many.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so even not for non-prescribers, it could be useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for people watching, Kate's a really good person to learn from. I mean, she truly is an expert in the traditional model of women's health, reproductive psychiatry, and then now also an expert in the integrative side of women's mental health. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop to learn everything you need to learn practically about treating women, which is half the population. And, this is a kind of niche that if you have in your practice, not everyone can do that. It's not that common. Like I said, if patients come to me about hormonal imbalances with the sex steroid hormones, I mean, like thyroid, adrenals, everything I can do. But with this, I'm like, I got to refer you to someone else. I think I've referred people to you before. I mean, we're not in the same state, but I'm like, you've got this problem, go to Kate. But so to be able to offer this, it's a kind of thing that can help your practice grow faster. And I bet was part of your success, like having this unique skill set.
Yeah. And I'm in Colorado and like people are a little bit more like woo woo here. So I have no doubt that learning a lot of the integrative and holistic strategies has helped grow my practice faster and like attract the patients that I really want to be seeing.
Oh, totally. Because a kind of patient who's interested in looking at things from that kind of holistic perspective is interested in lifestyle modification, like willing to do the steps that you describe besides like just taking a pill, is willing to do the changes between sessions that are a part of the treatment plan.
Yeah.
It's really enjoyable to work with patients who are really engaged in the treatment process. And I think so many people who are not in private practice are used to working with people where it's like this uphill battle. And that's not been my experience at all in my practice. I don't think it's been your experience. It's honestly, because like when you charge people a little bit of money, they have a little bit of skin in the game. They're not there to waste your time, their money, anything. And you feel like you really do get to have this transformative impact on people.
Yeah, it feels really good when you feel like you're not working harder than the patient. Like,
yes, completely.
Like we're both kind of like equally invested in the treatment and it's really collaborative. And yeah, it just like feels really good to work in that way.
And if people are interested in your program and want to learn more about it, how should they find you? And any links I can just drop when I publish this video, I'll drop it below.
Yeah, so my website is tendtohermd.com. And there's a page for my practitioner program on my website, and you can set up a discovery call if you're interested in learning more.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll link to both the homepage and that specific landing page with the details. And yeah, if you're even at all curious, talk to Kate. Like she really knows what she's doing. She's created something really great. I saw the outline of all the modules and I'm like, I need to take this. This is really good. So truly, I really appreciate you doing this with me. Is there anything else you wanted to share about your program that we haven't covered?
Oh, I don't think so. No, just appreciative of you for, taking the time. And like, I think, as I'm building my program, you realize like how much you put into building your program. So just really appreciative that you've invested so much in all of us.
Oh, thank you. No, it's like, it's turned into something that I didn't even realize it was going to turn into when I started. It's like my little baby. I have to take care of this. It's a toddler now. It's 2 years old, 2.5 years old. So no, it's been my pleasure. And thank you so much for just taking the time to do this. I know you have a busy schedule. Well, so thank you again. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you soon in one of the calls.
Bye. Appreciate it.